Updates on Operation Warp Speed COVID-19 vaccine development and distribution. Briefing today are HHS Secretary Alex Azar, Dr. Moncef Slaoui, the Chief Scientific Advisor to Operation Warp Speed, and General Gustave Perna, the Chief Operating Officer for Operation Warp Speed. They will all make opening statements, after which we will open up the floor for on-topic questions. Their statements or answers to questions will be on the record today. We kindly ask that you keep your questions related to the topic of the briefing. When asking a question, please make sure to state your name and publication, and please keep your questions as short as possible so that we can get to as many questions as we can in the time we have. Any additional follow-up may be sent to media@hhs.gov. Please stand by while we prepare for the live stream.
Okay, well, hello everyone, and thank you for joining this update on Operation Warp Speed. Because of President Trump's founding and leadership of Operation Warp Speed, even as we face daunting epidemiological trends around the country, we have reasons for optimism. With Monday's announcement from the Independent Data and Safety Monitoring Board for Moderna's candidate vaccine that it showed about 95% efficacy, we now have 2 safe and highly effective vaccines that could be authorized by the Food and Drug Administration and ready to distribute within weeks. Operation Warp Speed has accelerated the timelines for delivering an eventual safe and effective vaccine in a number of ways. We made development investments in 5 different vaccines and upfront pre-purchase agreements with 6 vaccines, driving drug makers to begin manufacturing before they know whether their products would be successful or not. We've worked closely with these manufacturers to ensure that they have what they need in the way of raw materials, with Operation Warp Speed applying the same skills and that keep the U.S. military supplied to ensure that there are no delays in vaccine production. Because of this work, by the end of December, we expect to have about 40 million doses of these 2 vaccines available for distribution, pending FDA authorization, enough to vaccinate about 20 million of our most vulnerable Americans, and production, of course, would continue to ramp up after that. We've been laying the groundwork for distribution and administration for months. There are 4 major tasks necessary to get the manufactured product to Americans safely in order to save lives: allocation, distribution, administration, and ongoing monitoring and data work. We've led much of the groundwork for these efforts and covered the major costs. We've paid for the vaccines. We've worked to ensure that administration costs will be covered by private insurers and the federal government through Medicare, Medicaid, and our program to cover COVID-19 costs for the uninsured. So no American will face an out-of-pocket cost for getting a COVID-19 vaccine. We procured ancillary supplies like needles and personal protective equipment and assembled them into kits that we will pair up with vaccine supplies as they're distributed. This overall task is a partnership between the federal government, including Operation Warp Speed and the CDC, and the 64 state, local, and territorial public health jurisdictions that CDC works with on public immunization programs. For allocation, the CDC's highly respected, long-standing Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices will make recommendations to the CDC director about how to prioritize populations for distribution of initially scarce vaccine, and will then be allocating vaccine to jurisdictions on a pro rata population basis. Then the federal government will use the contract we have with McKesson, one of the world's leading distributors of pharmaceutical and medical products, as well as a direct arrangement with Pfizer to ship the product from manufacturing sites to where the jurisdictions decide it needs to go. We've been working closely with those jurisdictions as they draw up their plans for where vaccine needs to be shipped and how it will be administered, which they've already submitted to CDC for review and have received feedback on. We've done a great deal of work at HHS to support jurisdictions in these efforts. Last week, we reached nationwide agreements to allow administration of the vaccine by pharmacy chains and networks of independent pharmacies that cover more than 60% of the pharmacies across the country. Because of these agreements, states can have us ship product directly to these partners for administration. The vast majority of Americans live within 5 miles of a pharmacy, so vaccination in pharmacies is a huge piece of ensuring easy access to vaccines once they are authorized or approved and recommended for the general public. Using pharmacy networks allows us to expand access beyond just standalone brick-and-mortar pharmacies because pharmacists, pharmacy interns, and pharmacy technicians also provide vaccinations in places like grocery stores. The ultimate goal here is to make getting a COVID-19 vaccine as convenient as getting a flu shot. This easy option complements the agreements we announced last month with CVS and Walgreens for them to offer vaccines in nursing homes and assisted living facilities, which present special challenges. I am pleased to report that we have seen tremendous uptake of that option already. 99% of skilled nursing facilities across the country have signed up, and 100% of facilities in 20 states are signed up. Finally, while any vaccine distributed will have already gone through months of safety testing, we're also working with jurisdictions to ensure that they're enrolled in the information technology infrastructure that we need to monitor for any potential safety issues. As I said at the start, we have reasons for optimism. Thanks to the incredible public servants working on Operation Warp Speed, elsewhere at HHS, across the country, and thanks to President Trump's unwavering support of Operation Warp Speed, we have such a bright future ahead of us. But at the same time that we have such good news on vaccines, we know we face daunting trends in the virus in most parts of the country. Right now is not the time for anyone to let their guard down. We continue to encourage Americans to follow the 3 W's. Wash your hands, watch your distance, wear your face coverings when you can't watch your distance, and avoid settings where you can't do those things. As we look ahead to Thanksgiving next week, I urge Americans to listen to guidance from their state and local governments and consult CDC's guidelines about how gatherings can be made as safe as possible. The safest way to celebrate Thanksgiving this year is at home with the people you live with and through virtual celebrations. Gathering indoors with people who aren't members of your household is a higher risk activity for spreading the virus. Please know that there is light at the end of the tunnel because of the sacrifices Americans have made and the hard work that so many have done. We will have the chance to celebrate holidays much more safely with family and friends not so far in the future. I now want to hand things over to Dr. Slaoui to discuss more about the current status of vaccine development and production, and then to General Perna to discuss in much more detail the distribution plans as they stand now. We anticipate having regular briefings of this kind for the media to ensure that you have full visibility into our vaccine and therapeutic programs, as well as our distribution planning in cooperation with the states. Dr. Slaoui?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Hello, everybody. So we are, frankly, very pleased with the progress made 10 months, a little bit less than 10 months after this description of this new virus, COVID-19 virus. In terms of vaccine development, we have 2 vaccines that have already shown 95% or so efficacy. We have 2 more vaccines that have shown that are recruiting phase 3 trials with about 11,000 subjects recruited in one and about 8,000 subjects recruiting in the other, and 2 more that should be starting their phase 3 trials in the very near future. How come 10 months after describing this virus, we are able, as an industry, as a government, as academics, how come are we able to be so far along? How was this achieved? What we've done was to leverage the decades of discovery and research that was done in identifying and optimizing platform technologies like cassette players that are able to play cassettes with different musics or make vaccines against different viruses. And we used a perfected set of cassette players to put in them the COVID-19 information, and they played that music as well as we could have ever hoped, both in terms of their performance in the clinic and in terms of their capacity to be manufactured at large scale. We also went very fast because we took financial risks to invest in parallel in very large clinical trials as well as in manufacturing before we knew whether these vaccines would be effective or not. The trials are about 2, 3, maybe even 4 times larger than what's required normally. The reason we've done that was to be able to accrue enough cases faster by having more people into the trial. But the other reason we have done that is because by running larger trials, we were able to document the safety of these vaccines on larger population and have higher confidence in their safety before use into the population. Here we are, a few months, 7, 8 months after the start of this process, with 2 vaccines that have achieved 95% efficacy. They will be shortly filed for emergency use authorization. And if approved, we have already started to stockpile vaccine doses, as Mr. Secretary has said, to the tune of about 40 million by the end of the month of December, and equivalent or slightly higher number on a monthly basis going forward to start immunizing the US population that need the vaccine. Now, let me say a few more words about the safety of these vaccines. As I said, we ran larger trials than required or than usual, and we have a pretty good understanding and description of what I would call the short-term safety of this vaccine during the period of their clinical assessment. This period is shorter than usual. What we are doing is 2 things. First, we analyzed in the databases of the FDA over the last 4 decades when, in time, do side effects of vaccines appear for vaccines that have been developed, and there are tens and tens of vaccines that have been developed. And we've seen that over 90% of those side effects occur within the 40 days after completing the immunization schedule. This is the reason why the FDA said we have to have at least 60 days of follow-up on 50% of the study population in the clinical trials before we can consider approving this vaccine. So we cover, I would say, the overwhelming majority of potential side effects. We will understand the performance of the vaccine from that standpoint already now. Secondly, we are working with the FDA and the CDC to set up together a very, very high performance active pharmacovigilance system that resembles almost to the day the assessment that we do in clinical trials, to look at the safety of the vaccines in the population as the vaccine immunization is rolled out later in December if the vaccines are approved. And these data will be analyzed on a daily or bi-daily basis, and as soon as signals may appear, they will be analyzed exactly as in a clinical trial and conclusion drawn. And it is important that we were able to accelerate the vaccines to the extent we have done, because as you know, unfortunately, we have north of 150,000 people infected every day and north of 1,000 people dying every day. And waiting 2 more months or 4 more months will count into the tens or the hundreds of thousands of more deaths, a harm to the population that no vaccine ever would even approach in decades or centuries. So we believe that these vaccines will have their safety and their efficacy very well documented to the point where we are today. We really look forward to the reviews with the FDA, who will independently, with its vaccine review board, potentially approve these vaccines, and then the CDC and the ACIP, as the Secretary said, would recommend their utilization. And then we look forward to the next 2 vaccines that we hope will be giving us data on their efficacy in the weeks to come, maybe in early January for one of them, and for the other, it could be in the next few weeks if data from trials running outside of the US read out, or maybe slightly later if trials in the US read out. Thank you very much, and I will pass now to the co-leader with me of the operation, General Perna.
Mr. Secretary, and of course, Dr. Slaoui, my co-leader, thank you for this opportunity to talk about and focus a little bit on distribution. So first, I just will say it is a large task, but it's a task that we are up for. And we're going to take a whole of America approach. That's why we're going to be able to do this. And we've been working on this now for over 6 months. Since the announcement 6 months ago on May 15th, we literally started planning accordingly. And it is the foundation of our planning started with the great experts at the CDC, and it's been extended to the jurisdiction planners so that we have a great collaborative plan on how to execute this together, right? And as the Secretary talked about earlier, we have implemented several mechanisms to allow other organizations inside of America to enable execution. Not one source or one organization will be responsible, but it's the collective group of us that will make this successful. So distribution of the vaccine will be based on fair and equitable availability of the vaccine pro rata to the population. So in other words, population of the state against available vaccine will be distributed to each state. We have been working these numbers with the states for a little while, and every week that goes by, we are able to create a tighter shot group of the actual numbers and the allocations that will be available to each state as we get going. Distribution will be by jurisdiction. As I've talked about, I use jurisdiction in states, sometimes inappropriately. So let me define jurisdictions, 64 of them, 50 states, 8 territories, and 6 metropolitan cities equal the 64 jurisdictions. We're doing extensive planning with each of these organizations so that we implement their plan. Right, so they will figure out where we want the vaccine to be distributed to and administered, and that's where the vaccine will be distributed accordingly. So we want to emphasize following, of course, FDA guidelines, CDC, ACIP guidelines, the governors and the states will figure out the plan, and we are ready to execute in collaboration with their plan as we've been working on for 6 months, doing numerous tabletop exercises and now extending it into actual rehearsals of how to move the product from fill-finish sites to distribution centers down to actual administration sites. We are making sure, as I said, that it's a whole of American approach. So let me pull the string on that a little bit for you. So clearly here in Health and Human Services, the CDC, the cornerstone, are experts that know how to distribute vaccine as they do every year annually for influenza, as they've done for H1N1, etc. Very talented group of people who know all the technical aspects and all the requirements that are needed to make sure that the vaccine, once we have it fill-finished, we can distribute in a safe and effective way. The second step, as I mentioned earlier, is the 100% collaboration with the jurisdictions, making sure that we are integrated and synchronized and ready to implement their plan for a way they want to execute immunization down at the administration sites as they define it. And we're ready to do that because we've been working together for quite a while. CDC published a playbook back in September, and the jurisdictions have been going through the playbook, filling it out. We've been collaborating, and we've been working the plan and the nuances to make sure that every detail is covered. Second, we are working with commercial industry, the experts in this field, those that know how to produce, store, distribute, and administer the vaccine accordingly. They do this every day. This is the United States of America. This is not new to us. And so organizations, of course, starting with Pfizer and Moderna, right, who know how to produce, fill finish, and then begin distribution of the vaccine, right? It's their core competency. Then we're working with McKesson, a large, very large distribution company that knows how to produce or distribute vaccine throughout the entire country, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then, as the Secretary mentioned, we have collaborated with pharma such as CVS and Walgreens, right? And so that we have already laid out plans and coordinated memorandums of agreement to ensure that we're executing the right way in accordance with the jurisdiction plans. As they direct, we'll execute. So we're bringing this whole of America approach from government to industry, and we're bringing it all together to ensure that safe and effective vaccines are delivered to the American people in a timely manner. The time associated with delivery. We will begin distribution of the vaccine within 24 hours after emergency use authorization is approved, right? And only after the science has determined and approved it accordingly, then we are poised and ready to begin distribution. Distribution will occur from our fill-finish sites, and will go to all 64 jurisdictions that we are responsible to ensure that they get vaccine for within 24 hours. So everybody, every jurisdiction will have access immediately. Upon the initial push of vaccine, which is the quantities of vaccine that are available upon the emergency use authorization, then we will begin a weekly cadence of delivery of vaccine. As vaccine comes off the shelf, as it has been approved and available for distribution, we will distribute it to the 64 jurisdictions. So, initial push, and then a continuous cadence of delivery of vaccine to ensure that we rapidly expand the availability to the entire country simultaneously. We are working with jurisdictions to do several things, though, that we need to make sure that we get done as we get closer to final approval at the EUA by the FDA. Three things that we're working with the jurisdictions that we need to have. First, we must have jurisdictions create good, solid, expansive provider enrollment, right? As many organizations as they want need to be enrolled so that we can expand distribution rapidly to the quantities of vaccine that's available. Only to providers that are enrolled can we distribute to. So they can limit it to a certain amount, or they can expand it so that we can ensure that we're covering the entire country, as the Secretary alluded to in his comments. Very key point. We have made significant progress in this area. We are just counting the eaches of provider enrollments that we need to get done as we get closer and closer to final distribution day. Second, we must have the states go through and sign their data use agreements. This is incredibly important, right, for the new vaccine going out to the American people. First, we must be able to see who got their first dose, where they got their first dose, and what vaccine did they receive as their first dose. Why? Because we must ensure that we can do the same for the second dose of each vaccine that we're sending out. The second thing, and really important, is we want to make sure that we have a good, consistent flow of vaccine out to the American people. And so our ability to track the uptake, the actual administration of the shot in an arm, is going to be essential to us making sure we deliver vaccine on a continuous basis. So really important. The third thing I would to keep the jurisdictions working on is their actual rehearsals in the execution of the plan. We conduct tabletop exercises at this level, right, where all of government and industry and jurisdictions participate, but then we're expanding it now to actual execution down at the tactical level or down in the local cities. How do we work a distribution of vaccine through the CVS, Walgreens, et cetera, at the hospital? How does it actually get received, unloaded, stored, and then administered is the rehearsals we're working. I continually emphasize this when I talk to jurisdictions. It is a great mechanism to check and double check to make sure everything is in place. What we're doing to make sure that that we are ready at this level after working these details for the last 6 months, as I've told the team, 2 things we must have. One, upon emergency use authorization, all of America must receive vaccine within 24 hours, as I said. I think this is incredibly important. Fair and equitable distribution of the vaccine throughout the country simultaneously. There is no haves and have-nots. It is an equitable distribution, and we are driving hard to make sure that that happens. The second thing that we want to do is make sure that the cadence of vaccine delivery following the first push is routine so that states/jurisdictions can plan for it and account and develop execution of the administration in a routine method so that the population is well informed and that they know where to get the vaccine and when to get the vaccine. And so those 2 points we're driving home as key essential tasks at our level. And so, Mr. Secretary, thank you. I'll pause.
So as we get ready for questions, I just want to conclude the opening by expressing my deep appreciation to Dr. Slaoui and General Perna. You know, whenever I created Operation Warp Speed, I called around to people in the industry, experts in vaccines, and everybody said, the person that you need leading this is Moncef Slaoui, the world's leading vaccine developer with the greatest track record of delivering results, and he has proven that. I met with the Secretary of Defense and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and they immediately said, the person you need leading this effort is General Gus Perna. And it is the American people owe a deep, deep debt of gratitude to these 2 individuals, as well as the hundreds of people on their teams who are delivering the kinds of results, historic results, that we have seen in the last week. So we'll turn now to questions.
Thank you, operator. We can now open it up for questions.
Thank you. At this time, if you would like to ask a question, you may press *1. Please unmute your phones and state your first and last name when prompted. To withdraw your question, you may press *2. One moment, please, for the first question. Zachary Brennan, you may go ahead and please state your outlet.
Hi, thanks for taking the question. I'm with Politico. So I'm curious if someone can talk about federal plans for vaccine waste. So say you're trying to vaccinate a hospital with 37 doctors, and the Pfizer vaccine only comes in, 5 doses per vial and 195 vials per container. What is the plan for those remaining doses that might be left over?
Let me ask General Perna.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Secretary. So really important question, and we've been working hard with the jurisdictions to make sure that the plan provides the details to that end. So you mentioned it. Pfizer comes at a minimum package of 975 doses per tray, and Moderna comes in at 100 doses per tray. With that said, though, that's only a constraint because of what we have to do to maintain it at the right temperature for stability. So you can break down both vaccines, right? You can pull out quantities of what you want to execute and put them, reduce them and put them in 2 to 8, normal refrigeration, and then execute them within 5 days. That's the key. So it's the planning the specified execution that we're counting on. And the states have been working this. One of the reasons that we asked and we brought Walgreens and CVS in special, as the Secretary mentioned, is because they know how to break this down and do small quantities for important groups. And so we've worked very detailed plans with them, and we're collaborating that with the jurisdictions to make sure that no vaccine is wasted, and that when they go to immunize at specified places, they have the right techniques and procedures to make sure that only the required doses are reduced to the right temperature for administration, and that the others stay in the appropriate temperature for stability.
Great. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Next question comes from Evan Brown. You may go ahead and please state your outlet.
Hi, good afternoon. Evan Brown from Fox News. To piggyback on the last question, there has been a lot of talk about the need for refrigerating the Pfizer vaccine at an extremely low temperature. Are there plans to either provide more of these refrigeration units to either retail pharmacies or healthcare facilities? Is there a way, and I'm thinking back earlier this year, the ability to ramp up production on things like ventilators. Is there a way to ramp up production either through the Defense Production Act or something else to build more of these refrigeration units to get them where they need to be?
So I'll ask General Perna to continue on that discussion. Do you mind either yourself or Dr. Slaoui also, I want to get out there the latest information that we have that's public around temperature stability on both the Moderna vaccine and the Pfizer vaccine. I think that'll be an important technical clarification for people, but perhaps first, General, on the cold storage on Pfizer and equipment.
Yes. Yes, Mr. Secretary. First, I'm just, Dr. Slaoui laid it out for us, as usually, incredibly well. I will tell you that both the Pfizer vaccine and Moderna vaccine, as he said, are, these vaccines are ready to be administered. What I've been coaching jurisdictions is don't be afraid of the constraints because of the vaccine and the temperature requirements. We have walked through every individual step on how to maintain Pfizer vaccine with ultra cold refrigeration, as well as what does it need if it's maintained in the box that it's delivered via dry ice, with excruciating detail. So first, we know where all the ultra cold storage refrigeration is in the country. We asked the jurisdictions months ago for this data. They went and identified it and tracked it down. They also were provided with resources on how to go buy more refrigeration if they wanted to increase the distribution capability throughout their jurisdiction if it was required. Many states don't require additional refrigeration. They have enough. And or how do they supplement with dry ice as accordingly. So we've laid all that out. My message, don't be afraid of the refrigeration requirement. The capability exists. If more is needed, the capability exists to purchase and have it delivered in a timely manner for both refrigeration and dry ice. And then I think...
Yeah, so I think keeping the vaccines refrigerated when they are stored in mass is not an issue, as General just explained. It's important to know once you thaw them, for the Moderna vaccine, you can keep that vial thawed for a month, 30 days at 2 to 8 degrees. That's enough time. Each vial has 10 doses of vaccine. That's enough time, clearly, to immunize 10 individuals. In the case of the Pfizer vaccine, you can thaw the vial. It also contains 10 doses of vaccine. You can keep it for 5 days at 2 to 8 degrees. That's ample time to immunize in the setting of a pandemic. So clearly we feel very comfortable that there will be minimum wastage. And I can tell you everything is planned to the minute. I'm learning about how the Army wins wars a little bit. It's impressive.
Great, thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Beth Long, you may go ahead and please state your outlet.
Hi, thank you. I'm Beth Long with Inside Health Policy. I'm wondering, with both of these vaccines potentially getting EUA clearance around the same time, how will you determine, or how will it be determined, who gets which vaccine, if they're both available? And also, how much of the population do you expect will need to get vaccinated to achieve widespread immunity?
I'll ask Dr. Slaoui if he could start with that.
I think we are in the fortunate position at this stage that the two vaccines have almost identical performance. And of course, it will all depend on the reviews by the FDA on the the minutiae of the data, exactly what label and the safety profile, etc. But they are very similar in their making and in their performance, and therefore I don't think there should be any constraints on who gets what vaccine. I think one in the hand is better than two in the bush here. You take the vaccine that's available would be my personal recommendation, but obviously the CDC and ACIP will make that call. In regard of your second point, this level of efficacy, very impressive, frankly, needs to be complemented. It's efficacy against disease. We need to, and we will, be able to assess the capacity of these vaccines to have also prevented infection, or if there is infection, whether they impact the amount of virus load that we have that sheds through which we infect other people. Most likely they are effective against infection, maybe not at 95%, and most likely they are effective at decreasing virus load and therefore virus shedding. Therefore, they should have an impact on transmission. People model that anything north of 70% of the population being immunized should decrease substantially the pressure of virus circulating and therefore substantially achieve herd immunity.
Great.
So, could I pile on
Please.
that? So just to add to that, we are ready to distribute both vaccines upon EUA approval in the fair and equitable distribution manner that I discussed earlier. We are ready to simultaneously, if EUA occurs, to ship both to all 64 jurisdictions.
Yeah. Thank you. Next question.
Thank you. Carol O'Donnell, please state your outlet.
Hi, this is Carl O'Donnell, Reuters News. Just two questions, kind of building on what's been asked. Do you foresee Moderna's vaccine being more prevalent and shipped in proportionately larger quantities to rural areas and other hard-to-reach areas, given its significantly less constraining storage requirements? And also, do you foresee there being some period of time where only the Pfizer vaccine is available, just given the timing of the EUAs that's likely? Thank you.
Good question. Let me ask General Perna.
So as Dr. Slaoui talked about earlier, we're going to wait for the science to lay some things out for us, and then we are going to execute the plans that the jurisdictions have established once they figure out the priority and where they want it to go. I will tell you that we've worked excruciating details to ensure that every area is being thought about, whether it's inner city or extreme rural areas, so that we have the capability and capacity to do so. Really, again, the connection is our ability to partner with industry, both distribution and pharma for administration to really achieve that success.
And that's Carl. That's team worked with the 64 jurisdictions. We actually gave them two hypothetical vaccines with these types of profiles described on them, the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine profiles, so that as they think about which outlets they would want to use and designate for us to ship to or have shipped to, that they would fit those profiles. So I think it's been built into their jurisdictional planning. Next
and
question.
in regard of your question on the lag between the two vaccines being available, as you know, we're probably talking about a week or 10 days. It will be a call of the FDA as they review the files, whether they will hold one VRBPAC or two different VRBPACs. But the lag time between the two vaccines is going to be very, very, very minimal.
Great. Next question.
Stephanie Ebbs, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Thank you. This is Stephanie Ebbs from ABC News. Can you walk us through a bit more detail what might happen in that 24 hours between an EUA and shipment? And specifically, do you anticipate that the ACIP committee would meet and determine recommendations for how to prioritize that initial shipment of doses before it goes out to states or after?
Yeah, so Stephanie, that's an excellent question, and I'm working directly with CDC Director Robert Redfield on how we could convene the ACIP, hopefully concurrent with the FDA review. Customarily, they wait until there's a licensure from the FDA, and then 48 hours later we'll meet and provide advice out. But we're working to see if we can actually facilitate a concurrent review process that's collaborative with the FDA sharing whatever information the ACIP would need to do its job so that it doesn't add any extra delay. With over 1,000 people perishing per day, we want to, our mission at Operation Warp Speed is about saving lives. Every hour, every day matters, and so we're going to work to try to minimize that, any type of delay there. Next question.
Tom Howell, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Hi, this is Tom Howell from the Washington Times. I just want to know if you could give us a sense of what type of storage will be used in different settings. In other words, there's the ultra-low freezers, there's the refrigeration for a certain amount of day, there's the dry ice and thermal shippers. Which kind of places will be using which, hospitals, large chain pharmacies? Have you sorted that out yet?
So mostly hospitals, universities, and the pharma chains have the ultra cold storage capacity. Pfizer distribution boxes which contain dry ice. They're well instructed on how to manage the dry ice to ensure that the stability of the vaccine remains the same throughout distribution. The second point to that end is that we are partnering with the states, the jurisdictions, and pharma to ensure that the plan based on how many doses that we distribute initially and then through the cadence, right, can be, what's the word I want to use? We want to lead our way through execution so that distribution will be through organizations that allow people to be notified and be ready for the administration of a shot, at least initially through maybe December, January timeframe, until we have more vaccines that will be available throughout at many different locations.
Okay, next question.
Peter Loftus, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Hi, Pete Loftus from the Wall Street Journal. What steps are you taking to ensure that this whole process continues to go smoothly in the transition to the next administration?
Yeah, so Peter, in the event of a transition, the individuals that you're seeing here, other than myself, all of the individuals involved in planning at CDC and on the Operation Warp Speed team, these are career officials. So they aren't impacted by any change in leadership. The work with the states is deeply embedded with CDC's work processes. So in the event of a transition, there's really just total continuity that would occur. Next question.
Emily Cox, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Hi, this is Emily Cox with CQ Roll Call. Secretary Azar, there's a CNN report that HHS staffers have been instructed that if they hear from anyone with President-elect Joe Biden's team that they are not to communicate with them. So I wanted to get your response to that. And then I also wanted to ask, I've heard a lot today about the role of the 64 individual jurisdictions. Are you encouraging the Vice President or the President-elect to reach out to those individual jurisdictions to find out the plans in lieu of more meaningful collaboration at the federal level?
So we've made it very clear that when GSA makes a determination, we will ensure complete cooperative professional transitions and planning. But that's we follow the guidance. We're about getting vaccines and therapeutics invented and get the clinical trial data and saving lives here. That's where our focus is as we go forward with our efforts.
Operator, we have time for 2 more questions.
Thank you. Charles Fishman, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Charles Fishman with The Atlantic. A 2-part question about dry ice. Can you tell us roughly how many of the places receiving the vaccine have the ultra-cold freezers and how many rely on dry ice just as a percentage? And I think last week or the previous week, Operation Warp Speed said it would provide to the places that need dry ice the first recharge, the first 750 pounds for each container. Can you tell us how you're going to do that? Where is that dry ice going to come from, and how is it going to get to those people who need it the day the vaccine arrives?
Okay, so initially, I don't see any place where the vaccine is delivered that it won't go into an ultra-cold storage refrigerator. As we are dealing with the initial doses available and we're distributing accordingly, we've coordinated and we've asked the jurisdictions to plan for it to go right into that type of capability so that we can learn and transition together as we expand doses available to each of the jurisdictions. So initially, I believe all will go into ultra-cold storage refrigeration. Second point to your question about the dry ice, we did and we have coordinated and contracted for the first refresh of dry ice to all that we distribute if it is required. If it goes into the ultra-cold storage, like I just said, then it's not required, but there's surely to be exceptions as we work through every detail across 64 jurisdictions, from the Pacific all the way through the Northeast, and then down to the South, East, and then back up to the Northwest. There is going to be an exception, and I wanted to make sure we were ready for that. So we've coordinated. Industry, commercial industry for dry ice production, we've coordinated through them, as well as in particular Pfizer to help with this, and then distribution will be through FedEx and UPS. So I feel very confident in that plan.
Great. And I think we've got time for one last question, please.
Thank you. Hassam Ahmed, you may go ahead. Please state your outlet.
Yeah, this is Hassam Ahmed from AFP. My question was, since, this approval seems like it's a matter of just a couple of weeks away now, what does that mean for those phase 3 trials and how you go ahead collecting data? Do they, since it's approved, people on the placebo arm will obviously want to get the actual vaccine. So how does that affect how we, accrue more scientific information? And is it still a phase 3 then, or does it move on to phase 4? If you could talk about that a little bit, please.
So very important question. Thank you for asking it, and one that we have been discussing at length with all the parties involved. First thing to say is, unfortunately, the rate of transmission in the country is such that, as Pfizer, for instance, has already reached the final analysis, the number required for the final analysis and announced it today, it is very likely that Moderna will also be shortly attaining that number and announcing it. So sensu stricto, from the standpoint of efficacy analysis, the trials will have achieved their objective. From the standpoint of long-term follow-up into the trials could still generate substantially important information, such as persistence of protection over time and safety over time. In that regard, we are working with the FDA and with the companies on when to cross over the placebo group to the vaccine, and within the placebo group, whether that crossover should happen in a staged way depending on the prioritization, for instance, that the CDC and the ACIP would have put forward. That will happen. The question is more when. Is it at EUA approval? Is it when 10% of the population has been immunized for a particular strata of the population that has been prioritized? Is it when the BLA is approved, which actually from a regulatory standpoint is the trigger point? That's the latest possible. So we're talking about a period of maybe 2 or 3 months, which is currently what we project to be the time between the EUA and the BLA. As you know, we always said that the EUA was a pit stop on the trajectory to a BLA, and that's the case. So it will happen. It will have, therefore, an impact on our capacity to continue to have controlled data, but it will not impact our capacity to continue to have data. We just will not have the control group anymore, as they will be immunized. There are strategies to still extract information from that, and at that stage it will also potentially have impact on recruiting subjects in other clinical trials. Now, I do want to make a point here and a plea, frankly, which is that we now know that vaccination is possible. Not only it's possible, but it's incredibly effective. It's very likely that the other vaccines that are being tested will also be as effective or substantially as effective. I would really ask for the population of people who want to volunteer and help to come and participate into the clinical trials. A, because without their participation, it's impossible to know whether more vaccines can be demonstrated to be effective and safe and made available to the population. But also there is here, I think, a clear potential individual benefit, which is, you know, the EUA may be approved in the middle of December or so, and by the time the vaccine starts to be laid out, you may, as an individual, only have access to the vaccine in a month and a half or 2 months. If you participate into a clinical trial, you have a 50% chance to have access to the vaccine tomorrow. So both from an altruistic standpoint and from a personal standpoint, it would be great for people across the diversity of populations in the USA. Please go and participate to a clinical trial, any one of the clinical trials. Thank you.
Great, thank you, and thanks to the media for the excellent questions. Just 2 concluding points. First, as I mentioned, we'll try to have these technical briefings occur on a regular basis for your benefit. Listeners, your viewers, I just ask you to please keep emphasizing, with the vaccine news that we have, with the therapeutic approval that we have, there is light at the end of the tunnel, but we need people to get there. And the way people are going to get there is by practicing good individual behaviors of washing your hands, watching your distance, wearing your face coverings when you can't watch your distance, and avoid settings, especially right now as it's getting colder. Indoor settings like crowded indoor restaurants, crowded indoor bars, or home-based settings indoors where you're getting together with family, friends, neighbors, and not watching your distance and wearing your face coverings, letting your guard down. You put yourself at risk. Please do those things, because thanks to the great work of these individuals, thanks to President Trump's leadership of Operation Warp Speed, thanks to the world's and America's great biopharmaceutical industry, there is such promising hope ahead. We want you all to get there so that you can take advantage of it. Thank you very much for being with us today.